Of course, if you go forward in history, the left loses its connection to the working class and its role in pursuit of socialism and revolution. You end up with a left which is a very big myth maker. They're very big in myth. I'm sounding like Trump here, but they excel perhaps in myth in the way that even the right doesn't. And I thought we might ask ourselves, what are the predominant left-wing myths today?
I do think left versus right is a good example of a myth in the sense that it is an attempt to slightly naturalize or definitely dehistoricize class struggle. So it's like left versus right, but it's not capitalist versus proletarian. It's not in class terms. It's precisely an attempt to try and put all these other things which are not to do with class in the place of class struggles. Anyway, I just wanted to make that meta point.
No, but it's a very important point. Like left and right is myth in a certain sense today, especially in the age of culture war.
I've noticed this thing where certain young people who are nominally on the left are using like class identity as identity, and it's a kind of new class identitarianism. And the whole myth of viewpoint politics is so deeply ingrained that they realize like the identitarianism of the past 40 years is not working, and they kind of get that we should talk about economics and class differences. So they're like, well, as a working class person, and oh my God, you're like so bourgeois. They use it in these moral terms. The morality of identitarianism is this deeply ingrained, ideologically like inculcated myth that the liberal left cannot escape from.
Can we become post-myth? Do we even want to? That's some of the words with which a recent documentary on Roland Barthes' Mythologies ends. We'll come on to that documentary maybe in just a bit, but we are here to discuss that work, and we're very happy to be joined by Catherine Liu. It's been a very long time since she's last been on. Hello.
Hey.
And hello to George.
Hey, it hasn't been quite such a long time since I've been on, but thanks for not forgetting that I'm here as well. I appreciate it.
And hello to me, Alex. I guess you know who I am if you're listening as well, given this is the reading club. But maybe you're a new joiner, in which case, welcome. Welcome to the BungaCast Reading Club, where we take old works and new and investigate them, try to critically examine them. And this year in particular, we are choosing works that go along with one of our 5 thematic priorities this year, which, because I don't have them written down right in front of me, I'm going to try to remember them off the top of my head. I should have them, it should be at the tip of my fingers, but it might not be. We have the pre-political, we have militarism and war, we have state capitalism, we have political recombinations, and we have illiberalism irrationalism and something. I had some other word there.
I mean, irrationalism is an interesting one because I'm sure we'll talk about myth and reason and all these sorts of things.
I was going to ask you all about the myth of the post in BungaCast but there wasn't a post. There was only a pre. But I was going to actually razz on try to demystify your love of the prefix.
Who are you talking about? Us as a podcast or Alex?
Alex.
Alex does like a prefix. Yeah, this is true.
I remember a prefix.
Speaking of post, I remember posting once that the fact that everything is post something nowadays speaks to our inability to actually be able to name where we are and what is going on. It speaks to the kind of diffuseness of the era.
Speak for yourself. I don't use post.
You don't use post? Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm going to go post to make a very George-like joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get started. Just to briefly introduce, you are probably familiar, have heard of this work at least. It came out in 1957. It's a collection of 53 short essays, which were written in the years preceding its publication, and not post, because that would be kind of complicated. Anyway, and most of which were first published in the French literary review, Les Lettres Nouvelles. It draws on linguistics, especially sociostructuralism, some psychoanalysis, especially Freud, and it plays with this idea of latent and manifest meanings, for example, of dreams. There's some Sartre and there's some Marx in it, and it's rather complicated. I think it's a rather challenging read, even if the content that occupies most of the book, the first, I don't know, 3/4 of the book, in which Barthes examines specific myths, is actually quite intelligible. The theoretical scaffolding which he introduces and works through towards the end is a little bit more difficult, particularly its relationship to linguistic structuralism, and maybe Catherine can help us kind of rebuild that scaffolding so we know what it looks like as a whole and in its process of development, which indeed is I guess a lot of what Barthes' concern is, to historicize and not make things appear natural and flattened. It's this work of demystification to show how the natural, or rather how the historical becomes naturalized, as he puts it.
By the bourgeoisie.
By the bourgeoisie. Well, I'm getting on to them. Myth transforms history into nature. I mean, that's the most resumed summation of the book, and it's an almost direct quote from the book. To quote directly, myth has the task of giving an historical intention a natural justification and making contingency appear eternal, end quote. His concern in the book remains Marxist and revolutionary. It's bourgeois society that produces myths, and old dead myths are not of his concern here. Bourgeois society produces myths, and he polemicizes against the bourgeoisie for this reason. In fact, he argues that the only non-mythological is direct productive activity, where you speak directly to what you're doing. The woodsman, the woodcutter cuts tree. He speaks tree. He doesn't speak of or on or about tree. And the other non-mythological activity would be revolution. So we're going to come to those points as we work through this, because we want to inquire as to whether we think that's right. Just to cite some examples of myths that he works through, critiques in the first part of the book. The example that he most returns to is, to use the antiquated language, Negro soldier on the cover of Paris Match magazine, where this signifier stands for French imperiality, and French imperiality as inclusive and benevolent. Other famous ones include wrestling, how the staging of a morally clear and legible contest where suffering and punishment are immediately meaningful is brought out. Catherine wants to talk a little bit about wrestling, so we're going to come to her on that in just a second. There's steak frites, symbol of strength and vitality, timeless, essential French gastronomy. The notion of margarine is shown in an ad as to be disgusting, but then it turns out to be tasty and useful and cheaper than butter. So this is the technique of inoculation, to introduce critique of an institution as a way to inoculate the public from, I guess, a more thoroughgoing critique of said institution or the form of society in which we live. Another point which we will return to. Just two more quotes to kind of set up what this book is about before we actually work through it. Myth hides nothing. Its function is to distort, not to make disappear. I think that's important. And secondly, that myth is speech stolen and restored. Only speech which is restored is no longer quite like that which is stolen. So when something becomes mythified, it comes back different and altered. It's distorted, but it's not really making reality disappear. Anyway, some of these myths, do you guys have any favorites of yours that you would like to speak to?
Yeah, I think, Catherine, do you want to go first with wrestling, and then I'll talk about wine, because I really like that one.
Wine. Oh, okay. Now I want to set the stage a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Go for it, please.
Barthes wrote this book during the explosion of consumer society in France. It was the beginning of what they call the 30 glorious years of growth, and much of it was facilitated by the Marshall Plan. And you have a society that was rigidly class-based, almost, still really entrenched in the agricultural mode of production, the Catholic Church being a powerful institution, sort of rocked to its core by the introduction of just advertising and commodity goods. And when I teach the French New Wave, the first film of which is shown in 1959, it's a kind of youth quake that's happening in France in the 50s during this period of time that Barthes is writing. And he says that he had just read Saussure's structural linguistics, and he was using the system of decoding that Saussure inspired him to do, and we can talk more about what that is, to deal with like the explosion of images. Guy Debord does the same thing later on in the 60s. And, we can use a word like traumatized. Like I think all of French society was fairly traumatized by the massive introduction of produced goods, of images, of American culture, and the culture industry. So that's one thing to hold on to, right? It disrupts every single relationship. It disrupts every single institution is sort of building up to 68. But the other thing is that I don't have this on my fingertips, but the dialectic of enlightenment, another mid-century book that deals with myth and mythologies, had not been translated into French. And it doesn't get translated into French until like the late 60s. Barthes is deeply, deeply steeped in the French language, in the classical French language, and the decoding and demystification of power that is a legacy that comes out of La Rochefoucauld and La Bruyere, who he recounts, he cites a lot. And it's like a court society ideology critique that he draws on to create these lapidary statements about a confusing society, chaotic, in which all that is solid is melting into air. So I really want to position this time and place of the 50s in a way that's really that's like on the project of ideology critique without having read the Frankfurt School essays, but it's the European leftist intellectual who comes out of a bourgeois society trying to deal with the flattening effects and a new form of class relation that is coming from the United States. So I think it's really important to situate this text in that way. And then we can talk about Saussure, because Saussure is such an important figure for Foucault, for Barthes, for Derrida, for Lévi-Strauss especially. And I used to teach it to undergraduates, the course on general linguistics. And I stopped because people can't read anymore. But we can go back. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, I think
it's
If you
interesting.
want me to talk about it now, I can talk about it now.
No, we'll come back. We'll come back to that. I do want to lay it out.
Yeah, a bit of context. I mean, anybody who's read this book, either in its clunky English or its beautiful original French, will be struck by the fact that this is a very, very French book in so many ways. I think, just to build on what you were saying, Catherine, like what you've got here is late, so 57. This is the same year that Uses of Literacy was published, which is a kind of one of the founding texts of British cultural studies. So you have that kind of, and they're very, very different. So here, and also this Mythologies is very different to Dialectic of Enlightenment or History and Class Consciousness, because it's an attempt to kind of critique popular culture or provide this kind of map of interconnected important bits of popular culture without an idea of the commodity. I mean, it's quite striking that you have this, and I think this is a very French way to do it, right? Here are some examples, and these examples, if you put them together, you can infer a theory from them. Sorry, this is nothing against.
I see a mocking expression on your face, but
no,
yes, it is. But the thing was that for me, when I first encountered this text was an incredible, gave me incredible permission to write in a certain way. These short chapters, the not scaffolded by an academic argument. It is written in very beautiful classical French, but he tried to enact like the kind of constellation thinking that Benjamin was talking about with regard to commodity culture, just sort of radiating connections. Also, the rhizomatic logic that Deleuze later talks about. I'm a big fan of that. But there's. I like to think of this text as like blogging before social media. posting before
Yes,
posting.
it was pre-posting. I was actually going to make this point later because it is, yeah. And I think, so I said it's very French, and I actually mean that in a, as a British person, listeners might not have got this, but actually in a kind of admiring way. The method of composition, it's really like you just read these short, snappy things, and it is like these totems of popular culture. What do they really mean? Which is a really, I think it's a way to approach popular culture that, and I really enjoyed reading it the first time I read it, and I suggested it for the reading club because I kind of wanted to go back to it and see if I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time I read it. And it is that idea of like, here are these things which are important, and they're precisely important because you overlook them and you take them for granted, and here's what they really mean. And for the reader, it's like, wow, this is quite, it's, you want to go to the next one as soon as you finish one of the chapters because you want to see what he selects as the important parts of this kind of map, and also what these things that you've been taking for granted your whole life really mean.
Yeah,
but the meaning is not exhausted. It's like a non-exhaustive hermeneutic.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting, Catherine, you situating it in the 1950s and the Western European encounter with a consumer society, because we were commenting, I think, on some previous reading club, or we've made this point a number of times in different ways about when looking at works from that period, that concern with describing this kind of new thick ideology which needs to be critiqued, and the role of reification, I guess. But I mean, again, that's to use a more Frankfurtian term, that which I don't know if that even had been translated.
I feel like it's I feel like it's actually it's a self-analysis of pleasure and the seduction of the commodity. I mean, because he gives himself to like wrestling, which is incredibly degraded as a form of like sport. The face of Garbo is very, very gay. It's like you're just like gay men fetishize Garbo, and he goes deep into what that fetishism means, what the face is, what Garbo represents. And so I think it's like not this kind of distance critique. So he's playing with this seduction, like he's in it, he's not stepped outside of it, and it's not an artificial thing like, oh, these people really like this. It's like, no, we really love this. What is this about? And
well, maybe we should give a bit of an example, or I just want to talk about the wine one.
Wine, okay.
Because I think actually you really hit the nail on the head there, Catherine. It's like things that, because he clearly, it's a bit kind of tongue in cheek when he sometimes talks about maybe I should just read a little bit. I could read almost the whole thing, but I won't, because it's only like 4 pages. Yeah, so he says, wine is felt by the French nation to be a possession which is its very own, like its 360 types of cheese and its culture. It's a totem drink. And then he keeps on going, it has a function specifically for intellectuals of giving them some kind of sanguinary robustness. It has this idea of vitality, which is very closely connected also to the steak. I'm just struggling not to just read out the whole thing.
Just read it.
But then I have to read all 4 pages. But yeah, I mean, let me see if I can. Why don't you go on to wrestling, Catherine, and then I'll find like one paragraph that I can read.
Oh, okay. Actually, I wanted to comment on the writer on vacation before we go to wrestling, and because it's like near and dear to my heart too. He's talking about a popular magazine that's featured a writer on vacation, and I think it is Gide. Oh yeah, André Gide, reading what he's reading on the Congo, actually, and it's photographed, and it's in the Figaro. And Figaro is like a right-wing magazine. And he goes on and talks about how writers are now proletarianized because they can also go on vacation. And when they go on vacation, however, they are always working. Like they're always writing, they're always reading a book. I mean, it struck like really too close to home. So he goes, but when we have the writer who the bourgeoisie wants to put in this exalted place, featured in mainstream magazines going on vacation, we proletarianize the writer, because what the working classes fought for, the famous French August, is the sense of vacation. But we know that the writer has a vocation and never stops writing, never stops reading. So this leads to the professionalization of the writer, which will eventually lead to his liquidation. I just love that, it does get to this point that, I've been thinking about all these years, which is about, the professionalization of academics, the destruction of intellectual life. But he's putting his finger on it here as, kind of Life magazine, Figaro, features on writers. And we just take it for granted today that, if you write a bestseller, like the New York Times will feature you, the New Yorker will feature you. These liberal gatekeeping institutions are in trouble. But since the 1950s, they've wanted to present themselves as kind of progressive and inclusive now of the writer with a new stature. And so Barthes is just saying, like, the commodification of the image of the writer, and also the segmentation of his or her their time into work and then vacation, actually presages the liquidation of the writer as such. Love that.
Very good.
Totally love that.
I've got a bit to read out about.
I have to not go read on holiday now.
Wine and
I'm going somewhere which I've never been to before, and I've just made a reading list of like 3 books to read while I'm there. I'm like,
what are we gonna do? I know.
I can't speak for everyone you're seeing on your holiday, but as a podcaster, maybe take a break from talking while you're on your vacation. I think
a polite way of telling someone to shut up.
Yeah. So he's talking about how milk is the anti-wine, not water, because in the basic morphology of substances, milk is the opposite of fire by all the denseness of its molecules, by the creamy and therefore soothing nature of its spreading. Wine is mutilating, surgical. It transmutes and delivers. Milk is cosmetic. It joins, covers, restores. Moreover, its purity, associated with the innocence of the child, is a token of a strength which is not revulsive, not congestive, but calm, white, lucid, the equal of reality. Some American films in which the hero, strong and uncompromising, did not shrink from having a glass of wine before drawing his avenging colt, have paved the way for this new Parsiphalian myth. A strange mixture of milk and pomegranate, originating in America, is to this day sometimes drunk in Paris amongst gangsters and hoodlums, but milk remains an exotic substance. It is wine which is part of the nation. I think one of the reasons why I like that one, and I was going to read the one, steak and chips. I mean, treat yourself to a steak and chips chapter, listener, after you've listened to this. But yeah, he links a lot of it back to like Frenchness. Like, what is it to be particularly French? Or I think his starting point is the French bourgeoisie and the sorts of myths which they create and the sorts of things which they want to naturalize. What role does milk play in this?
This goes back to the reading of Saussure, because Saussure says that all signifiers only signify insofar as they are differentiated or opposed to other signifiers. So the world of the signified, like wine and milk, are inert as signifieds. But within the system of meaning, like he's doing an autoethnography of Frenchness, wine takes on meaning because it is not milk. Milk takes on meaning because it is not wine. And then he just, he kind of has fun with it and goes really deep into this. The same thing with detergent. The whole chapter on detergent and bubbles is incredible too, like what cleanliness meant. But for Saussure and then for Lévi-Strauss, what they did was look at Lévi-Strauss, especially like systems, cultures are based on, for Lévi-Strauss, an ability to differentiate between the cooked and the raw. So this is like taking the cooked and the raw and saying it's not just primitive people who are, differentiating in this cultural system, but actually Frenchness is based on the differentiation between milk and wine.
Well, and the French now drink for the first time more beer than wine. I saw a post today lamenting the disappearance of whatever, La Belle France, whatever, some concocted 1950s image of France, of intellectuality, of wine, of leisure, etc., which perhaps its own myth, and tagging that to this news about beer being more consumed than wine for the first time ever in France.
I agree with the original poster. France is cooked. If they're drinking more beer than wine, it's all over.
Well, the Anglos have gone too far. I've said this before, but the Anglos have gone too far.
But nobody's drinking in England. The pubs are closing, so nobody's drinking.
The French are probably drinking less as well, as a whole. But to move on. We don't want to spend too long on this because there's a lot more to actually get through. But I should allow Catherine, if she would, to lay out this scaffolding, how Barthes' myth relates to Saussure's sign. How do those two dialogue with each other? How does Barthes move from the linguist's concern with meaning to his more political concern with ideology?
So I don't know why I was so excited about this idea when I read Saussure, but, let's go back in time. I read this thing, I read the course in general linguistics, and what Saussure's linguistics says is that the language itself is a system that is arbitrary insofar as signifying units are not motivated by reference. Okay, I know that sounds like really dry and boring, but I thought, wow, this is so amazing, because in the traditional eschatology, which is very religious too, in the beginning there was the Word. The Word is motivated either by God or by something that's in the world of referentiality that then becomes like a unit of meaning. Now, there are certain forms of language that obey this law, onomatopoeia, pow or meow, or but even in that case, you could say that there isn't a pure sound that becomes linguistically significant, because different languages have different ways of representing the sounds of animals. When I taught this, I would say okay, so what sound does a rooster make in English? Cockle-doodle-doo. What sound does the rooster make in French? Cocorico. They're still similar because it's Indo-European, but but the arbitrariness of the sign is the basis of how the theorists, especially the French theorists, started to think about signifying systems divorced from a motivational referential world. And this is how language itself and meaning becomes denaturalized.
Yeah, I mean, this is
very exciting to me.
Yeah, no,
as a young person.
I think that's very, very well. But I know this wasn't the main point that you were making. But I remember when I realized that animals make different sounds in different languages, and my mind was just blown, because I was like, "What?" That it was a very important moment in my intellectual development. I'm actually not joking when you realize that.
Either. I'm making fun of myself, but yeah, I love that.
When you realize that some of the things that you've taken for granted, are so basic, like a dog says woof and a cat says meow, and a rooster says cock-a-doodle-doo, and you're like, well, no, that's actually socially constructed. You're like, what else is
linguistically constructed?
Is money, is property. I mean, you start putting in that thread, and you end up podcasting several years later talking about things like this. It's don't do it, kids. Yeah, sorry. I think that obviously, and I made this point earlier, but that theoretical framework that you just unpacked there, Catherine, is, it is a very different way to approach it than the commodity. Which I think, if you have that model of analyzing culture, you can do it in a very sophisticated way, like the Frankfurt School, or you can do it in quite a reductive way, where it's one logic fits it all. This wouldn't have been a very good book if every myth that he identified was really about class struggle. I mean, ultimately, he does kind of that's the kind of political unconscious, as Jameson might put it. But it would just be like, oh, wrestling is actually about class struggle. just like
but
in two
so there
paragraphs.
was-
So let's
the
get on.
So let me just finish this one part. So this for me was so powerful because the one thing that's being demystified here is bourgeois humanism. And if you came up through school like I did, before everything was like made into therapy, we were taught this kind of like classical approach to literature and history, which is based on, Cold War humanism. And when you read Barthes, you're like, oh, this is actually contingent. This is a creation of class society, that we think of the human as somehow centered in the world and consecrated by God, and everything's like really meaningful, and Shakespeare's a really great writer and all this other stuff. So it does take you into a different level of interpretation. The thing that I got really excited about, but now I'm kind of disappointed by too, is that Leif Weatherby's latest book about AI was allegedly like the application of Saussurian linguistics to large language models. Like you would just say that these systems that are learning languages, they're just taking the Saussurian logic of meaning to its extreme. Like there is no human emanator anymore. It's all structures and systems. But I started reading it, and it didn't seem that good. Or something about AI really bores me. And I just am like, okay.
It's a good premise.
It is a good premise, right? We should read that book next time. I mean, I should be a little more serious. I am really busy, so if something doesn't speak to what I'm working on right now, I don't go down that path. But it's an interesting premise that
Many such cases.
Why focus on the human when our relationship to language and meaning is fundamentally mimetic? I'll tell you one thing about my students and what teaching has been like is that most people aren't, I've said this in other places, most people are not individuals. We're not spontaneous or creative. We have to learn through mimesis to get to some kind of individuality. And AI is like, you don't have to do anything anymore. You just, enter the prompt.
I wanted to move on to specifically looking at this, I mean, as a way of kind of working through the Barthes' theoretical arguments and how he moves from Saussure through to his own approach to myth, which is that he argues that the signified in myth, which is different from the signified in just language itself, that the signified in myth, this history which drains out of the form will be wholly absorbed by the concept. It is the motivation which causes the myth to be uttered. So I wanted to try to explain this out. Let me try to return to his image, to the image that he uses most recurrently through the book, which is of the black French soldier saluting the flag or something like that on the cover of Paris Match. And this would be a case in which the history, all the kind of social and historical context of French colonialism, of imperialism, et cetera, gets drained out of that image, right? That's a history which gets drained out, and the form of the soldier will absorb the concept. Now, the concept here is all the motivation of basically communicating French imperiality as inclusive, as benevolent, etc. And so I wondered if we could try to dig up some other examples for the way that this works as a way of explicating what Barthes is doing here. The way that the concept, effectively the motivational aspect of myth creation, of this distortion that happens, is done, how that kind of infuses and takes the place of history. No takers on this? I mean, if we let's take the myth of the entrepreneur today, right, which is probably the most prevalent justificatory mechanism in contemporary capitalism, I would think. That the myth of the entrepreneur, I guess the entrepreneur stands for the capacity for making yourself, for social ascension, some basic fundamental freedom that capitalism provides, and indeed also for modernity and modernization. Those are all, I guess, in a way, the concept that infuses what is actually the history, the fact of what is the history behind the form of the entrepreneur, which would be, and this is kind of off the top of my head, so it might be not not the best laid out, but the history behind the entrepreneur would be, well, a whole system of exploitation, of surplus value extraction, of capitalism seeking to justify itself when it can no longer rely on old forms of authority like religion and order simply to justify that order. So, I mean, I guess that's the kind of dynamic that he works with in the way that the concept takes the place of history, of the history in the myth.
Yeah, I mean,
is it the concept or is it the image?
I'm looking. You'd have to dig back into the. Well, he said the history which drains out of the form will be wholly absorbed by the concept. It is the motivation which causes the myth to be uttered. And it's important that myth, I think it's worth saying this, that myth is a form of speech, right? And he specifically says it's a form of depoliticized speech. We're going to come on to his conception of politics in just a second, because I think it's important to lay that out. But
I guess my kind of approach to this is, having not read Saussure and not being a semiotician, really, I think it's, in some ways what I found particularly interesting about is the very simple, and probably if readers know anything about this book, this will probably be the thing that they know, and that is that it's about the very principle of myth that transforms history into nature. And so this is like I think it is an interesting question. How do you transform history into nature? What is the process by which you construct something which is natural? And so I think there are some interesting points at which he says things like, myth hides nothing and flaunts nothing. It distorts. Myth is neither a lie nor a confession, it is an inflection. I mean, and so the idea is that it's not trying to, and this is the reason why I find this interesting is that it is a particular kind of model of ideology. There are some other models where it's about distraction, or it's about kind of hiding or occlusion. But actually, he has a very different model of what it is to kind of, I guess you could say, engage in a speech act or represent something.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry for I'm going to be a little pedantic here, but and none of this is at my fingertips. I haven't taught this in years, but when Alex said speech, that is actually the translation of Saussure linguistics, the term parole versus la langue. There's language and then there's speech. And speech is when there's a motivated individual who uses language and creates la parole. Like in French, to take the floor is prendre la parole. So there seems to be an individual behind speech. But this in itself, for structuralists and for Barthes, is an illusion. You have systems of meaning. You think an individual or a motivated, non-contingent agent is making meaning, but you're just caught in the web of signification, of signifiers. See what I mean? So that is an interesting anti-bourgeois, critical of ideology kind of thing. But his use of the term concept, though, that's a little hard for me to take. But the naturalization of class society, of historically built class society as nature, that's the big question here, because France is becoming an industrial society, a consumer society, moving out of a rigidly hierarchical, I would say remnant bureaucratic feudal society into something that's modeled on the United States. And there's a whole language, advertising language and in popular culture that Barthes is trying to decode.
Yeah, I think the advertising language and the kind of Americanization is really below. I'm just kind of flipped open to a random page, Audrey Hepburn. There's so many references to, I guess, because that's the kind of Frenchness is maybe being increasingly defined by its opposition to, by being not American, even as French society is becoming Americanized, or probably precisely
And,
because
and you know,
it's
I was
becoming
thinking about the
Americanized.
milk thing, and I think that I'm not 100% sure about this, but the promotion of milk drinking really takes place like very late in European history. Like people didn't chug a lug a big glass of milk until the American dairy industry decided that was really good for children. So I don't know if this was something that he was seeing in France. Like people did not drink milk until there was like a packaging, pasteurization, advertising. So everything that we consumed sort of in like pre-consumer society suddenly has a myth behind it that promotes that kind of consumption. So the the system of wine and milk is reflected in the advertising system that he's milk and childhood, milk and purity that Barthes is like responding to. I've like looked for French advertisements from this area, from this time period, because you know when I'm teaching New Wave cinema, and the predominant advertisements are for vacation, which is like the writer on vacation, going on vacation, cleaning detergents, Ariel. You this is a brand in Europe. Like you need to use your washing machine and bubbly drinks.
Mm. Yeah, I mean,
And it's
those
usually
are
a woman with a beach ball.
those pretty archetypally kind of aspects of American consumerism imported into Europe. Then. So, what then is Barthes' conception of politics? Because his argument is that myth is depoliticized speech. For him, the political, I mean, he defines it really rather broadly. It's the whole of human relations in the real social structure, in their power of making the world. That's direct quote. So it's, I suppose, totality understood dialectically. It's all of combined social relations and people's capacity to make and remake the world. So that's politics. And I mean, there's other elements where he points where he describes or defines politics in a little bit more of a conventional way. So in one of the myths that he examines, photography and electoral appeal, which is basically about the way that politicians use image in their portraits. This is all, back before politicians communicated via moving image, via TV, principally. It's mainly based on photography and how they express themselves in their photographs, and how the far right and the far left would express themselves more through communicating action, because their eyes are, I don't know, doing something which makes them look like they're men of action, of thought and of action. Whereas the nationalist parties did something else, the Christian Democrats did something kind of bland, etc., etc. Anyway, in that bit where he called photography and electoral appeal, he argues that photography is an ellipse of language and a condensation of an ineffable social whole. It constitutes an anti-intellectual weapon and tends to spirit away politics, that is to say, a body of problems and solutions, to the advantage of a manner of being, a socio-moral status. And then he talks about bourgeoisisme, which is a kind of petty bourgeois revolt, which we can maybe get into or not. We don't need to do that right now anyway. But I just wanted to draw attention to that, because that is a moment in which he defines politics in a more conventional way, as to say, a body of problems and solutions, as opposed to this very affect-based politics of communicating image, a manner of being, etc. So you see a politician and, hey, they look like me, so I'm going to vote for them, versus the politician who has an actual platform and a program which seeks to resolve definite problems. But in the theoretical chapters, he defines politics, as I said, a lot more broadly than that. And it's important because of what he understands to be bourgeois myth and how we might get beyond it. Myth, if it's depoliticized speech, it is to depoliticize is to remove contingency, remove historical direction and human social creation from things, right? It's to effectively naturalize them, as we've discussed many times. So what do we make of the argument that Barthes makes regarding the type of language which is not mythological, right? So if a lot of speech is bourgeois myth making in pursuit of naturalizing the historical, in pursuit of making things seem permanent or essential, then what do we make of the argument that the direct producer is their speech is not mythical or myth producing, and that revolution is also the only form of politics which is not myth producing, because it's this cathartic act of recreating the world? Can revolution abolish myth? And the reason I draw attention to this, just to add one little thing, is because, as we'll come on to discuss, it's interesting what happens to Barthes when you remove revolution. Like if you're using his technique of ideology critique and you remove revolution, i.e., the possibility of a new social order, remove that from the equation, then what happens to ideology critique? I think that's very interesting and a question that I want to come to. But before that, what do we think of myth as depoliticized speech, and the forms of speech which are not depoliticized, which are not myth?
Did he actually say that the revolution is not mythical and that there's a kind of speech beyond myth?
Yes.
Okay.
Effectively, yeah. I mean, he said he uses the example which I already mentioned before of the woodcutter, for whom there is no
Right.
meta language. He speaks tree. It's a transitive. It's a transitive verb rather than the intransitive speaks about tree, speaks on tree, blah 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 blah. And so the direct producer is somehow not wrapped in ideology, effectively not wrapped in myth. And that revolution is this cathartic act. Now I'm trying to find that quote specifically, just to.
But I think that really is a romanticization of labor, because never in Marx does he talk about like the singular worker transforming the natural object. It's always about, it's a labor process. It's an organized labor process. There's a exploitative relationship already of human beings to the natural world. There's just a different mode of production. So I can see where like this leads to a kind of hippie 68 romanticization of immediacy, like, and imminence. Like you're talking about, the revolution is not, or this kind of productive labor is like in imminent relationship with the world, an unmediated relationship. And I don't think that that's not historical materialist. I mean, it's fine, but I do think that there is an encrypted, as in Baudrillard, an encrypted Catholicism, because it's like the word, like, and the Trinity in the God, in God, the God, everything's united in one God, divine object, the Holy Spirit, the Father, or Jesus Christ. You're all like, it's all one. It's pure immediacy with regard to divinity, and I do think things get a little tricky when he has this like moment of idealization.
Yeah, I think that's good.
I think his politics are not great.
Well, it comes through elsewhere. Let me cite this as well, because I think you hit the nail on the head with the criticism you made of the romanticization, because he also remarks that the left exists to speak for the oppressed, and that the oppressed makes the world. He has only active, transitive, that is political language. The oppressor conserves it. His language is plenary, intransitive, gestural, theatrical. It is myth, right? So the oppressed can only speak directly. Can almost, in a way, he comes close to saying, because he says something like quasi, but the oppressed cannot lie, or is like almost can't lie, basically, and then we see where that ends up.
From the subaltern can't speak to the oppressed can't lie. I mean, yeah. I guess I was kind of thinking that you were asking the question kind of in a different direction, almost that can you decode myth sufficiently or totally so that it becomes political speech? Because if you are able to reintroduce or to kind of specify the contingency that is there, but that has been I don't know, taken away, do you get to a kind of a pre-myth. I mean, I'm careful of using too many prefixes, but do you get to kind of like a non-mythical? Oh, that's another prefix. Do you get to what is the opposite of myth? I mean, and is it something that you get through the directness of your interaction with the physical world, or is it something that you get by undoing myth, by sort of saying, actually, that steak is just a bit of meat. I mean, there's not more to it than that. That is what it is.
He actually says at some point that the petit bourgeois love tautologies. Like, it is what it is.
That's good. A equals A. Yeah, indeed. No, I think, and it's good, or just because, or the factual. He also critiques bourgeois maxims, probably like, oh, effort brings its reward or whatever, which are also forms of naturalizing society. I also was thinking about this question of this romantic element that he introduces of saying the direct producer is doesn't do myth, basically.
It might even be just Catholic, because it's not just the direct producer. I'm looking at the puissance et désinvolture, like power and, how's that translated? Power and involuntariness. And he talks about how the gesture of the gangster has just completely unmediated. It's completely like without meditation. And so gangsters and gods do not talk. They move their heads and everything is completed. It's like there's this kind of imminent world of immediacy with this like gestural completion. That actually like goes back to the woodcutter.
Yeah, well, like the only way to break through this fog of ideology somehow, and I think that ends up in problematic place. And also, if we think of today, I mean, the sort of labor that is often performed, where if you're doing sales in a call center, are you not? Is your speech not myth creating in some way? I suspect it is, even if you are indeed, you're in the work and somehow of. Maybe not production, but in any case, it's kind of proletarian labor of some sort. So,
but that's not productive labor. That call center is, service economy. Like,
well,
so if you want to be hardcore, it doesn't actually produce value.
Well, that's a fair point. But then, of course, in advanced economies, that's the reality for a lot of people. So, but to move on and to talk about the bourgeoisie, he refers to the way that the bourgeoisie exnominates itself, which is to say, it doesn't ever name itself. It hides behind a pretense of universalism, and it effectively denying division, denying class. He notes that you don't have bourgeois parties in the sense of you don't have a party called bourgeois party anywhere. You have national party, for example, which speaks for the bourgeoisie, but under the name of the nation, not in the name of one specific owning class. So I wondered if do we think that still holds? Does the elite still function? And I say elite now rather than bourgeois. Does the elite still function in the same way in the 2020s as it did in the 1950s? In that regard, in somehow in exnominating itself, and is that a way that it rules?
It's a good question. I tend to think there is still that I mean, nobody really is going to want to say I'm part of the elite, I'm a capitalist. Nobody's going to say here is a kind of historical materialist theory of society, and by the way, I'm one of the people who's kind of massively benefiting from this. So, join my party. We can.
The Sage of Omaha did, though, right? Who's Warren Buffett? He said like the whatever,
there's class struggle, like and my class is winning.
Class struggle, and my class is winning. Exactly. So there are cases of that sort of.
Yeah, but that was a kind of demystifying. Like, oh, look at me, I'm just. I just eat my cornflakes and wear my cheap shoes, and that's why I've got $1 billion. This is his
so that is myth itself. So that is myth. That is myth. Right there as well. Even as he's exposing class society, is that what you're saying?
Well, maybe I think you're. But I don't think that like the role of the bourgeoisie when it what does the ruling class do when it rules? It doesn't celebrate ruling. It's not like this is a very timely reference for any football fans out there. It's not like Arsenal fans or Arsenal players celebrating their victory. Instead, what does it do when it rules? It reproduces itself. And so there needs to be sociological mechanisms for the perpetuation of the elite or the bourgeoisie, but it doesn't need to be like, here are the badges that you need. You now get to wear a gold lion on your football shirt, or you now get to wear this badge saying I'm a member of the 1%. It's not, there's always been, that's part of a general ideology critique, that you don't have to be, you don't, if you're part of the ruling class, you definitely don't want to be exclusively talking about how there is a ruling class and you're part of it.
I think there's a new level of obfuscation that is going on right now, which is that Elon Musk can call Peter Thiel called Greta Thunberg the Antichrist. Mark Zuckerberg recently, in an all hands on deck call with at Meta, said that he's training AI on Meta workers because Meta workers have a higher IQ than the average population. There's a kind of self-justifying mythologization of a vanguard which wants to push humanity further, in the case of Thiel, and the person who's holding it back is Greta Thunberg, therefore she's the Antichrist. Or there's this intelligence elite, which is just high IQ people at Meta are producing more value. They're shaping the future, and they deserve to shape the future, not because they have more money or resources or they're the rulers, like in a kind of Genghis Khan kind of way. I'm like or the pure domination coercion of like a powerful military lord, or even the physical domination of the working classes exercised by the great railroad barons. No, their myth about themselves is that they're the smartest people in the world. They take the most risks. They are defining the future. In many cases, it's true. They're defining the present, and they are justified in doing so because they're the smartest people. And I think that they're somehow like the exercise of pure domination always needs a fig leaf. So if they're not the most virtuous people, they're the smartest people. If they're not the most physically strong people, they're the smartest people. So I think that every ruling class or elite, if you like, needs a self-justification that is a myth. That is, there's no demythologization of power, because the raw exercise of power, which is what we're actually seeing with Trump here, is pure abuse. It's like corruption, hyperaccumulation of wealth, and military power. So you just have to like think about how this text, inadequate as it is, does allow us to demythologize demystify certain exercises or spectacles of power. But it doesn't seem to have, and I mean, Alex, you've read it more recently than I have, it doesn't seem to have like a temporal line for revolution that isn't just like, the coming of Christ. Like there's going to be some kind of, collapse of these myths. And then in revolution, we're going to have pure action. We're going to move beyond the arbitrariness of the sign. And, it's a little bit like a shortcut to get to a transformed world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to like really not like this world. Like he's very, like what he wrote about Garbo and Audrey Hepburn, like the consumer world of the 1950s is actually providing a lot of nourishment.
Okay, so this is good, because I wanted to come on to this at the end. Actually, it was the final question, but let me just jump to it now, because I thought it was kind of funny, because what is the role of the mythologist today, in the sense of the person who consumes the myth in both form and meaning and reveals how the myth functions, etc. Because Barthes says the mythologist is, quote, condemned to live in a theoretical sociality, end quote, because he's critiquing the ideology behind things like the Tour de France or the Lonely Planet Guide's exoticization of places to be consumed. It's actually the Blue Guide, but I just thought I'd bring that up to date. But there we go, right? And so you're basically that annoying person who is a bit outside society, doesn't consume stuff, and is just revealing what is going on behind the consumption. And what's people's response to that today? Let people enjoy things. Let people enjoy things. Stop being annoying. Stop being this smart-ass, irritating Marxist who knows everything and wants to reveal how it's actually all ideological and depoliticizing, whatever.
People might say that to you. People say to me, "Thank you for pointing out that they're just trying to sell you products." No, I think that the mythologists...
I don't think people are... sorry, there's not... The popular liberal position is not like, oh, let people enjoy things. No, it's precisely like, oh, that's very racist. Oh, that's heteropatriarchal. This kind of critique is much more common in liberal institutions. It's like, oh, that made me really uncomfortable. There's a kind of sort of constant adjustment critique about bias that, if we only had no bias in advertising, we'd really be able to enjoy it.
Yeah. I think both of these things operate simultaneously as it happens.
I actually think this is a really important point. For me, like the myth maker that Barthes is really kind of lurking behind all of this is the specifically American ad man. Like, this is the person who then, from the 60s onwards, maybe the late 50s onwards, really starts to develop some of these stories and really starts to make them very compelling. And this is, the classic critique of consumer capitalism. And I think it does reach an inflection point. I think Catherine's right that, like, now we're not supposed to enjoy things. We're supposed to consume things for the right reason, but not really enjoy them because they are telling us important things that are true about the world but aren't enjoyable. So the kind of enjoy your symptom, let people just consume things. I think that kind of... I'm just thinking, like, there was an inflection point around
that cultural populism is over.
Adbusters kind of ate it. So the cultural populism is over, and the kind of I can see through these attempts to just sell me stuff, and now that seems a little bit out of date, and it is now the kind of it's not about seeing through or not seeing through the myths of consumption. It's about applying a representational lens to how you act in all spheres of life, including consumption. And I think a lot of the mythologies are consumption focused.
I think that's right, though. The kind of Trumpian, radical conservative backlash against that, I think, it would be itself, it would say, no, just enjoy things, but you must enjoy. I mean, this is, to take Todd McGowan's kind of thing. This is the superego injunction to enjoy. So there's something, it's still kind of ideological going on there, in which you must enjoy owning the wokes, right? And that becomes its own form of political correctness. So there's no real escape from it.
What happens if you own the works but you don't enjoy it? It just kind of you're just condemned.
Well, no, you should not enjoy it because it's a political task which is imposed on you, not something which you enjoy as part of your kind of discourse, culture war activity, right?
I think so. So I think part of the problem is that this is an account of ideology critique with no account of culture industry, right? So this gets us back to, like, productive labor and surplus value. Like, one of the things that we're involved in here is the distribution of surplus value, because the productive labor, like the actual people making things, is reduced. It's increasingly automated. And so we have this world of advertising, of intellectuals, of writers, sort of debating the proper ways of consuming and enjoying. And Bach does make it more enjoyable, actually, to think about many of these images and paradigms. I'm just thinking about, like, this last sentence in Garbo's face. I don't think it means anything more than it does here as a kind of poetics that has no politics, actually. The face of Garbo is the idea. The face of Hepburn is the event. I don't think there's any he's differentiating in the Saussurean way, but he's also, like, creating a topography of really sophisticated enjoyment.
What I did want to move on to, there's a question about ideology versus poetry, which I want to come on to as well. But I think we should because we haven't done this yet, we talk about myth, right and left, because the fundamentally, the right is the home of mythology, right? And it does so in search of stability and order, making things seem permanent, and evacuating history
in the
from
20th
objects.
century, not in our century, but in the 20th century.
Right. So, well, I think it still does that, but it does it in different ways, because the right is rebellious now. So it's not searching really stability and order, but it does want to make things essential, right? Race is back, etc. Right. So I think there's but I take your
I
point.
disagree. I totally disagree, but we can go on here. I think the right is now pure spectacle. We're going to have, Ultimate Fighting Club on the White House lawn. We're going to have the Arc de Trump.
Well, so today, the
the
talk in Brazil for the past 36 hours has been Neymar being called up to the World Cup squad, and everybody's debating it and whatever, right? Most people I've spoken to and heard on the street are against it, but apparently it's 50-50 according to the polls. But anyway, important political matters here in Brazil. But he just posted today, I thought this was perfect, a picture of a Bible quote and a picture of his Bible. Now, what is on the cover of his Bible? Batman. It's a Batman themed Bible. I'm not kidding you.
Okay, so like, how right is that? How permanent is that? It's the right is pure. Is like is fandom.
Yeah. No, I agree, but let me get on to the point, because we agree that the right is not what the right of the 19th and 20th century was. The left ostensibly, and this is kind of sort of following along Barthes' argument, is challenges essentialism and in favor of contingency. But I think it's important that Barthes is very orthodox here. I mean, in a Marxist sense, in that he recognizes that the left is not revolution itself, and as such, the left is often a creator of myths. Right. And the example he cites, which would obviously be much more pressing in his time, is the Stalin myth, which was the obvious leftism of his day. Now, leftism here used as a pejorative, as against revolution. And the Stalin myth there was the cult of personality, the sense of inevitability that it would lead to Stalin, orthodoxy, discipline, unity, the Communist Party as ipso facto, the proletariat formed as a party, etc., etc. Those are his concerns at the time. Of course, if you go forward in history and the left loses its connection to the working class and its role as in pursuit of socialism and revolution, you end up with a left which is a very, very big myth maker. They're very big in myth. I'm sounding like Trump here, but they excel perhaps in myth in the way that even the right doesn't do it. And I thought we might ask ourselves, what are the predominant left-wing myths today? Because we can no longer say, well, the left is revolutionary in its bulk, and the right is, they do myth in search of stability and order. There are some left-wing myths like Stalinism, but that's not the world that we are in today. So what are kind of predominant left-wing myths? Do they serve the same purpose that Barthes alleges all myth?
Easy for you to say. The one thing just to say about, like, to be meta, or not to be too meta, but to be a little bit meta, like, I do think left versus right is a good example of a myth, in the sense that it is an attempt to slightly naturalize or definitely dehistoricize class struggle. So it's like left versus right. I mean, it's obviously French. This is the origins of the terms left and right, but it's not like capitalist versus proletarian. It's not like it's not in class terms. It's precisely an attempt to try and put all these other things which are not to do with class in the place of class struggle. So I think it is worth just making that point, because he does talk about, the flight from the name bourgeois is not illusory. It's the bourgeois ideology itself, and that's part of it. It's better to say, oh, left versus right, than to say, capitalist versus proletariat. I mean, anyway, I just wanted to make that meta point.
No, but it's a very important point. Like, left and right is myth in a certain sense today, especially in the age of culture war.
I don't know if this answers your question directly, Alex, but I've noticed this thing where certain young people who are nominally on the left are using like class identity as identity. And it's a kind of new class identitarianism, and our whole the whole myth of viewpoint politics is so deeply ingrained in what I would call like liberal institutions, liberal media, not left, but liberal media, is that they're like, oh, they realize like the identitarianism of the past 40 years is not working, and they kind of get that we should talk about economics and class differences. So they're like, well, as a working class person, and oh my God, you're like so bourgeois. They use it in these moral terms, and we can't, like, the morality of identitarianism is this deeply ingrained, ideologically like inculcated myth that the liberal left cannot escape from. Like, we need more coldness. There is no, Marxism is not an identity, it's a methodology, right? And to say like, oh, like I'm a class first Marxist and that makes me really uncomfortable is just the same thing as saying like,
Yeah.
I'm a person of color and that makes me really uncomfortable.
So the US is becoming British because Britain is the great pioneer of class as identity. And I mean,
really?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of bad things come from Britain. So, you know,
a lot of good things too.
A lot of bad things come from Britain, including colonialism.
Railways, you know.
Railways were good. I want to be more silly and talk about Romans in the movies. So I just want to talk about this whole crazy passage about bangs. He talks about the hairdos of Mankiewicz's Julius Caesar, and then he talks about everyone in this film being sweaty, but everyone having really curled bangs. And the only person who is not sweating is Julius Caesar, because he doesn't think. Everyone else is thinking, and Julius Caesar, because he's going to be the victim, is not thinking. His bangs are perfect, and Brutus and Cassius and everyone else, including Portia and Calpurnia, are all sweaty. This is the kind of thing that, the kind of freedom and creativity that Barthes gives himself permission to do in his writing, and in a nominally political way. Sorry. But I just feel like there's something about the lightness of this text that we shouldn't overburden with too much political meaning, because this is not great ideology critique. This is really good observation about popular culture. And let's not put too much on it, because I don't think, I mean, you could say like in the end, like he kind of trivializes politics too. And he like makes the spectator's position with regard to film and fashion more interesting, more pleasurable. So he expands like spectatorial discourse and language. I mean, the crazy, you know, the Garbo, Hepburn, the bangs, the Roman bangs. It's well observed and highly idiosyncratic. I don't know if it's French, as it is like very, very eccentric. But if Barthes is a leftist, he's an extremely eccentric leftist, and the revolution becomes like the state where language itself becomes immediate, where you're not thinking, where you have utter immediacy, and that's not like a serious position. Sorry, that's not a serious.
No, but that's
position.
great. That's a brilliant insight into it, that he's kind of a bit of a 68er then in his conception of revolution. That's really good. I like that. I mean, to be a bit silly about it as well, because and also to show the kind of lasting influence of this. So there's this documentary, right? So I just watched it from which was on BBC4 in 2020. It's called.
This is going to be a bad thing that comes out of Britain, isn't it?
Yeah, this is going to be a bad thing that comes out of Britain. It's done by a guy called Richard Clay, who's a professor of digital culture at Newcastle University, and he goes around talking about different myths and interviews artists about their installations or stunts or whatever else that they do, which are forms of demystification. Now, as you can imagine, this is like the worst fucking art that you could think of, and the politics are even worse. So he goes through and he talks about, for example, it starts off with plastic, right? And so you can look at a mythology of plastic as malleable, as modern, as blah 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 blah. How does he approach it? But did you know plastic is actually polluting. We need to subvert the myth of plastic as like a good thing and show how it's polluting. And that, I mean, it just shows the lack of invention, the shallowness. And even if you are not expecting the whole theoretical edifice of Barthes to come through in this documentary, it's just you don't have any of the wit, any of the invention, any of the eccentricity even about it. It's just becomes a very banal sort of parade of left liberal prejudice. So, for example, there's no talk of plastic as being democratizing, something which is being created by workers, for example. You just need to learn that plastic causes pollution. He also notes, the presenter, and George, I'll bring you in just a second, that he goes, well, I'm no Marxist, but, Barthes was a Marxist and blah, 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 blah. And of course, his interpretation of this whole thing and his interpretation of Barthes and Barthes Marxism is, of course, the usual left liberal traduction of it, which is that, the workers don't rise up because of consumerism and because of false consciousness, and they're blinded, right? Which is, it seems like he didn't even read the book which this whole documentary is based on. One that you'll love, George, one last one. He goes, money. Okay, money is a myth because, it used to have value because it was made of metals. Now it's just paper, blah, blah, blah. He interviews an artist whose thing was to take cash out from the cash machine and stamp "Stay in the EU" on it and distribute the money. And apparently this was demystifying. This was apparently demystifying to stamp money with "Stay in the EU." I love that. Fantastic.
Yeah, I actually did watch this documentary, not all of it, because I did have to give up. Demystifying the nation state. I mean, just to go back to the plastics one though, I think he inadvertently makes a really interesting point, which is that we have replaced one mythology. It could make a very interesting Barthistic point that you replace the kind of the 1950s mythology around plastic, the optimism, the fact it can be molded into any shape, it can solve all of these problems. It's actually going to, it's going to replace tortoise shells and all these things. It can actually, ivory. These are going to be a thing of the past because plastic is like the manna, or it's like the it can be shaped into any shape and do anything.
Barthes actually writes, the hierarchy of substances is abolished by plastic.
Yeah, it's the alchemical kind of, and he talks about alchemy when he talks about wine as well. So it's kind of the alchemical apex. But what's the 2020s kind of mythology about plastic? It's that it's everywhere. The microplastics are in our macroplastics are on the beaches. Microplastics are in our balls. It's like plastic. It's ubiquitous. It's kind of and it's just destroying the planet. That kind of famous in my own head, the kind of 6-pack of beer plastic things with, it's got all these like birds or wildlife in its, their necks are caught in it, and it's, a 6-pack of dead animals that have been destroyed. This has become, plastic today represents a whole, you could really unpack this, a whole set of things about the sheer fucking hubris of thinking that we through consumption and production can conquer the world, and we've actually ended up destroying it. He doesn't take it that way. He's like, actually this artist who collects a load of plastic from the beach and puts it in an art gallery is actually, there's something real here, because plastic in fact is bad. It's like, well, if you'd read the Barthes and thought maybe the same method could be applied today, there could be something really kind of interesting there. But as you're right, Alex, it does end up just kind of it doesn't, I think, realize how it could have been an illustration of the fact that this technique or this method that he tries out in this book actually could still be interesting today.
But here's what happens, right, with a certain popularization of Barthes, when you lose, I don't want to say lose the Marxism, because then that sounds like, you need to be Marxist, and you sound like an identitarian who holds to their Marxist identity. I don't mean to say that, but when you lose the sense of critique being in the service of creating a new form of society, and that we collectively hold that power already, but we need to organize ourselves to be able to bring that about. When you lose that, what is the purpose of your critique? What is the purpose of your ideology critique, of your demystification, right? It seems ultimately just to be saying, I don't like that, and instead we should like the thing that I like instead. It loses the function of revealing what seems to be natural as historical. And this is the documentary is a perfect example of it.
Yeah,
Well,
it's the
so
historical bit of historical materialism. Part
Yeah.
of the methodological imperative there is to historicize things. And I think Barthes, like if you read Barthes that way, it's like, yeah, just assume that you could historicize absolutely everything about all these things that you kind of take for granted, and you know that's actually a good impulse. And if it's like, well, back in the 50s, you know, they thought this thing and they were wrong and we're right now, it's like, yeah, okay, well, you haven't really kind of internalized that lesson, or really, you know, you've taken away some of the dressing, and you've taken away the salad and left the dressing. I don't know, whatever. Sorry, Catherine, you were going to say something a bit more coherent than that, probably.
No, I just wanted to talk about the plastic for a little bit more, because this this whole post on let's call it a post. This whole little bit on plastic is about how this substance is anti-bourgeois and destroys like bourgeois hierarchy, or he talks about like feathers, fur, silver at being overcome by plastic, you know, and you have these like bourgeois. He's still living in a time when you have these bourgeois ladies with their fine china and their, you know, wood paneled like drawing rooms in France painted in the 18th century, you know, living with like baccarat crystal, and, you know, displaying through their family heirlooms their superiority to the great unwashed. And Barthes is like, look, plastic is here. Like all of the hierarchy of materials is out. There's this like joyful embrace of its democratizing qualities, which is really part of consumer society, and all that is lost. And we have this new this new puritanical hierarchy, which is like, plastic is so bad. I only have glass containers in my house. I never use plastic bags. I have 100 canvas bags, and I'm saving the world, and you're all destroying it. But the thing that I wanted to say was plastics is actually a petroleum product. And when people understood that it wasn't breaking down, the petroleum industry stopped any regulation of it. So one reason, and it's cheap to make. And when oil is cheap, plastics are cheap. And plastics, like, how am I going to get a tube of toothpaste, a tube of cream, and something that's not plastic? I'm going to carry around a little glass jar of Aquaphor? No, I don't think so. We haven't figured out how to create a malleable, cheap, waterproof substance, not out of petroleum, that does biodegrade. So the bourgeois lady who abjures plastic, and these artists and these like, you know, whatever radical environmentalists who are parading around with their consumption habits, they've created a new hierarchy. And Barthes, you know, for all his bad politics, is about trying to break down the privilege and the presumption of the European bourgeoisie. So that I don't know what I didn't watch the film, so I don't know what that.
No, you didn't, and you shouldn't.
I don't want to watch that film. It sounds
it wasn't required reading or whatever.
Completely horrific. But you know, in the end, like, plastic in the 50s was seen as a sign of progress, and the end of the post on plastic is like, and soon we'll be making plastic aortas, which has kind of come true. Like, they have actually created, well, they're pig aortas. They've created, you know, synthetic aortas to replace people's replace people's failing blood vessels. So there's all of this industrial optimism and consumer optimism still. And now we're like, you know, in the phase of saving the earth through regressive, like, identitarianism that also does not work, does not create. Yeah. There's no emancipation in any of these new identitarianisms. It's all like, just, we're going to learn more rules.
Perfect. And one final
it is freedom here.
Yeah, well, but this is right, and I think, you know, Barthes, the critique we've made about of kind of his kind of eschatological notion of revolution, where you just put all in the bucket marked revolution, everything that is not myth, all this bad stuff, right? But then we just have that exit, right? Which is a kind of problematic conception of I hate saying problematic because you sound like one of these identitarians, and it's problematic.
You've said quite a lot of
Yeah.
things that make you sound like that.
Yeah, I know. I
think
don't
you
know what's
need
going
to
on today. But the
just
content, it's just the form which is the
It's
problem.
the
The content is right.
microplastics in
Yeah,
your body
balls.
speaking
Yeah.
through you.
Yeah, exactly. But I have one final point, and feel free to comment on it. Otherwise, we can leave it there, or say anything else that you wish to say as a concluding remark. But about, we're in a rather different time, right, where there isn't any kind of even eschatological or not emancipatory vision. Barthes comments on the difficulty of his time of ideology versus poetry, which he thinks are you cannot synthesize, and I suspect that's right. But he puts out two options. One, you posit reality as permeable to history, and therefore you ideologize. And I think in that sense he means you polemicize, you become politically active in some way, right, behind an idea, or you posit a reality which is impenetrable, irreducible, and you therefore poeticize. And I think this is, if I've understood him correctly, he's talking about a trade-off between, on the one hand, a life without illusions, but which risks becoming disillusioned, and on the other hand, a sort of re-enchantment, right? So you have the path of ideology critique through which you might become disenchanted with the world, or the other one where you have a re-enchantment. So it's ideology, or it's poetics. And I would in Barthes' time, you might opt for ideology. In today's, maybe we need more poetics. I don't know.
Okay, I'm a very prosaic person, so
Yeah, I have no poetry in my soul.
I have a real problem with poetry, but maybe that's where I need to be challenged. I think there's a kind of poetics that he achieves just in writing.
Yeah, I think my knee-jerk reaction would be anti-poetics. Say what you mean, man. Don't say something you don't mean.
Don't be literal about poetry. I mean, the point here is more about a romantic notion of revolution. Even
that's why I'm very literal minded. I can't even understand poetry not in the literal sense. No, but one thing that just a bit of a stray thought, but hearing you talk, Alex, made me think is, if the opposite of myth is kind of historicizing, like, is it different to historicize after the end of history? Like, because there isn't as much history there, right? Is it different to historicize with a lowercase h when you don't have capital H history? I mean, this may not. It sounded, or in my head, it sounded like a really smart guy thing to say.
But I think there's a point there, because it's just stuff that happens, right? And it's in the kind of world without a future horizon. It's like, yeah, you can historicize all you want, but so what? Where are we going to go with it? And I think this is a topic which will be returned to at the BungaCast live event at Vel Duha in London on the 28th of May at 7 p.m. Get your tickets if you haven't already. It's also a really terrible place to put an ad for an event. What is that? An hour and a half into this episode. So if you're still with us,
the people who deserve to come will have got to the end of the episode, and so they'll hear the advert.
I think there will be no revolution without the full redemption of history, which is why we need history, and that's why I'm against you guys, because you keep harping about the end of history, even though history has proven itself to have survived its end. So I feel like history.
Our event is called "History's Back, Baby." It's
okay,
literally
I know. But you just went on about what's the use of history, the large capital, blah blah blah. You lost me there. I just I blank out when there are too many ends of histories. But yes, that sounds great. Sounds like a great event. I really do encourage people to read Barthes just as a mental exercise, because it's a very smart person. It's a text from a very smart person. Erudite in a way that no one is erudite anymore, trying to grapple with consumer society and the regime of the commodity.
Very good. Catherine, thanks for joining us for this reading club. This has been great.
Thanks for making me revisit one of this text. It's great.
It's good to go back to them. So it's goodbye from horror, from Hochuli, and history itself. I'm just saying that to provoke Catherine at the end. And George just made a face.
I have nothing to
He's
add.
speechless. He's speechless. That you can't do. If you can't speak, you can't do myth. So you're safe there.
No,
All right.
You know what? I'm beyond myth because I don't need to talk. When the revolution comes, no one will have to speak anymore.
The true end of podcasting. May it come soon. All right. Catch you later. Bye bye.